I never thought I'd become the kind of person who'd take revenge. I really didn't. For most of my life, I believed in doing the right thing, following the rules, keeping my head down and working hard. I thought loyalty meant something. I thought decency mattered. But there comes a point in your life when you realize that kindness without boundaries is just an invitation for people to walk all over you. And when they do, when they take everything you've given and throw it back in your face, well, that's when something inside you changes. My name is Sarah, and I worked in the finance department of a mid-sized manufacturing company for nearly 12 years. 12 years. That's a long time to give to any place. I started there fresh out of college, eager and hopeful, ready to prove myself. Over the years, I climbed the ladder slowly but steadily. I became the senior accountant, the person everyone came to when they needed something fixed, when the numbers didn't add up, when there was a crisis that needed handling quietly and efficiently. I wasn't flashy. I didn't make a lot of noise. I just did my job, and I did it well. The department I worked in was small, just 8 of us, and we were like a little family. Or at least that's what I used to think. There was Margaret, the department head, a woman in her late 50s who'd been with the company forever. She had this way of making you feel like you were part of something important, like your work mattered. Then there was Tom, the assistant manager, a guy who always had a joke ready, always kept things light even when we were drowning in spreadsheets. There were the younger ones too, fresh faces who rotated in and out every couple of years, but the core of us, we stayed. We were the backbone. And then there was the emergency fund. Now, this wasn't some official company policy or anything written down in the employee handbook. It was something our department had quietly built over the years. Whenever there was a little extra in the budget, whenever we came in under on expenses or found a bit of wiggle room, we'd set it aside. It started small, just a few $100s here and there, but over time it grew. By the time my story begins, there was close to $30,000 sitting in that account. We used it for emergencies. Real emergencies. When Tom's wife had a premature baby and he needed time off but couldn't afford to lose the income, we pulled from the fund to cover some of his expenses. When Margaret's house flooded and insurance was dragging their feet, we helped her out. When one of the younger guys got into a car accident and was facing medical bills he couldn't handle, we were there. It was our safety net, our way of taking care of each other when life got hard. And everyone contributed. Everyone benefited. It was built on trust. I was the one who managed it. That was part of my role as senior accountant. I kept the records, tracked the contributions, made sure everything was transparent. We had a simple rule. If you needed help, you asked. We'd discuss it as a group, and if it was a genuine emergency, we'd vote. Majority ruled. It was fair. It was compassionate. It worked. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how everything fell apart. Started with my mother. She'd been having health problems for a while, nothing too serious at first, just the usual aches and pains that come with getting older. But then the doctor found something during a routine checkup. A mess. They needed to do surgery, and they needed to do it soon. The procedure was scheduled for a Thursday, and my mother was terrified. She's always been strong, my mom, the kind of woman who raised 3 kids mostly on her own after my dad passed away when I was 15. She worked 2 jobs to keep us fed and clothed. She never complained. She never asked for help. But now, facing this surgery, she was scared. And she asked me to be there. Of course I said yes. Of course I did. She's my mother. There was no question in my mind. I went to Margaret the following Monday, 2 weeks before the surgery, and I requested 3 days of paid leave. I explained the situation calmly, professionally. I told her about my mother's surgery, about how I needed to be there for her, how I'd make sure all my work was covered before I left. I even offered to work extra hours in the lead-up to make sure nothing fell through the cracks. Margaret listened. She nodded. She said she'd talk to Tom and get back to me. I walked away feeling confident. I'd been with the company for 12 years. I had plenty of leave saved up. This wasn't some frivolous vacation request. This was my mother's health. I thought it would be a simple yes. 2 days later, Margaret called me into her office. Tom was there too. They both had this uncomfortable look on their faces, like they were about to tell me something they didn't want to say. Margaret started talking, using that careful, measured tone people use when they're trying to soften a blow. She said they'd reviewed my request. She said they understood it was a difficult situation. But she said they couldn't approve the paid leave. I felt my stomach drop. Asked why. I asked what the problem was. Margaret glanced at Tom, and Tom cleared his throat. He said the company was going through a tight period financially. He said they were cutting costs wherever they could. He said that while they sympathized with my situation, they simply couldn't afford to pay me for 3 days I wouldn't be working. He said I could take unpaid leave if I wanted, but paid leave was off the table. I sat there stunned. Unpaid leave. I lived paycheck to paycheck like most people. 3 days without pay would mean struggling to cover my rent, my bills, my groceries. It would mean choosing between being there for my mother and keeping my head above water financially. And this was coming from the same company that had just given the CEO a bonus big enough to buy a luxury car. The same company that had spent thousands on a corporate retreat the previous year. The same company that never seemed to have trouble finding money when it suited them. I tried to keep my voice steady. I reminded them that I had leave saved up. I reminded them of my 12 years of service. I reminded them that I'd never asked for anything unreasonable before. Margaret's face softened a little, but her answer didn't change. He said she was sorry. She said her hands were tied. She said it was a decision from higher up and there was nothing she could do. I left that office feeling hollow. I went back to my desk and stared at my computer screen without really seeing it. I felt betrayed. I felt worthless. 12 years of loyalty, and this was what it amounted to. I thought about the emergency fund, about all the times we'd come together to help each other. And I thought about asking. But I didn't. Not right away. I wanted to believe that maybe things would change, that maybe someone would step in and fix this. I wanted to hold on to the idea that my workplace was still a place where people cared about each other. So I kept quiet and tried to figure out how I was going to manage. The days passed slowly. My mother's surgery was getting closer and my anxiety was building. I called her every night to check in, to hear her voice, to reassure her that everything would be okay. But inside I was falling apart. I was angry. I was hurt. And I was starting to realize that I couldn't do this on my own. Finally, 1 week before the surgery, I decided to ask for help from the emergency fund. It felt strange, almost humiliating, because I'd always been the one helping others. But this was what the fund was for, wasn't it? This was exactly the kind of situation we'd created it to handle. I sent an email to the group, explaining my situation, asking if they'd consider covering the cost of those 3 days so I could be with my mother without losing my income. I kept it simple and honest. I didn't beg. I just laid out the facts and waited. The responses started coming in within hours. Most of my coworkers were supportive. They said of course, they said they'd vote yes, they said they were sorry I was going through this. I felt a wave of relief. Maybe everything would be okay after all. But then Margaret responded. Her email was short and cold. She said that while she sympathized with my situation, she didn't think the emergency fund should be used for this purpose. She said the fund was meant for unexpected disasters, not for covering lost income due to personal leave. She said that if they started using the fund for this kind of thing, it would set a bad precedent. I read that email 3 times trying to make sense of it. A bad precedent. My mother's surgery was a bad precedent. I thought about Tom's premature baby, about Margaret's flooded house, about the car accident and the medical bills. Those had all been approved without question. But my mother, the woman who'd sacrificed everything to raise me, she didn't qualify. Tom's response came next. He agreed with Margaret. He said the fund should be reserved for truly dire circumstances. He said he was sure I'd figure something out. He used the word figure like it was just a puzzle I needed to solve, like my mother's health was some kind of inconvenient math problem. I felt something crack inside me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and cold and final. I realized in that moment that the family I thought I'd built with these people didn't exist. It was all an illusion. They cared about each other when it was easy, when it didn't cost them anything, when it made them feel good. But the moment it became inconvenient, the moment it required real sacrifice, they turned their backs. The vote happened the next day. It was 4 against 3. 4 people, including Margaret and Tom, voted no. 3 people voted yes. The request was denied. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I just nodded and said thank you for considering it. I went home that night and sat in my kitchen in the dark, staring at nothing. I thought about my options. I thought about what I could do. And slowly an idea began to form. I'd been managing that emergency fund for years. I knew every detail of how it worked. I knew the account numbers, the passwords, the transaction history. I knew that it wasn't technically a company account. It existed in a gray area, funded by money we'd quietly siphoned from department budgets, managed independently, never officially recorded in any company ledger. It was our secret, Our little act of rebellion against the corporate machine. And that meant there was no oversight. No checks and balances. No one watching except me. I thought about what would happen if I just took the money. All of it. Every penny. I thought about the look on Margaret's face when she found out. I thought about Tom scrambling to explain where it had gone. I thought about the people who'd voted against me realizing too late that they'd destroyed the very thing that had kept them safe. It felt wrong. It felt petty. It felt like something a bad person would do. But I also felt a strange sense of calm, a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. They'd made their choice. Now I'd make mine. The next morning I went into work early. The office was quiet, just the hum of computers and the distant sound of the janitorial staff finishing their rounds. I logged into the emergency fund account and stared at the balance. $30,247. 12 years of trust and compassion sitting there in black and white. I transferred it. All of it. I moved it into a new account I'd set up the night before, an account in my name, untraceable to the company or the department. It took less than 5 minutes. 5 minutes to dismantle everything we'd built. 5 minutes to burn down the safety net. I logged out, cleared my browser history and went to get coffee like it was any other day. Nobody noticed at first. Why would they? The fund wasn't something we checked regularly. It just sat there quietly growing, waiting for the next emergency. Days passed. My mother's surgery came and went. I took the unpaid leave and I was there for her. I held her hand before they wheeled her into the operating room. I was there when she woke up, groggy and confused but alive. I stayed with her through the recovery, sleeping on an uncomfortable chair in her hospital room, making sure she ate, making sure she took her medication, making sure she wasn't alone. Those 3 days cost me more than just lost income. They cost me sleep, they cost me peace of mind, they cost me the belief that the world was a fair place. But I was there. And that mattered. When I came back to work, everything seemed normal. Margaret asked how my mother was doing. Tom made a joke about me looking tired. The younger co-workers went about their business, buried in spreadsheets and deadlines. Nobody knew. Nobody suspected. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that the emergency fund came up again. One of the junior accountants, a guy named Daniel, had a family crisis. His sister had been in a bad accident and he needed to fly across the country to be with her. He couldn't afford the plane ticket. He sent an email to the group asking for help from the fund. The response was immediate and unanimous. Of course, everyone said, "Absolutely. Take what you need." Margaret volunteered to process the transfer. She logged into the account. And that's when everything unraveled. I wasn't there when it happened. I was at my desk, headphones on, pretending to work on a budget report. But I heard the commotion. I heard Margaret's voice, sharp and panicked, calling Tom into her office. I heard the door slam shut. I heard muffled shouting, the kind that sounds angry and scared at the same time. Within an hour there was a department meeting. Everyone was called into the conference room. Margaret stood at the head of the table, her face pale, her hands shaking slightly. Tom sat beside her, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Margaret spoke slowly, like she was trying to keep herself from falling apart. She said the emergency fund was gone. All of it. Someone had transferred the money out and she didn't know who or how or why. The room erupted. People started talking over each other, asking questions, demanding answers. How could this happen? Who had access? What were we going to do? Daniel sat quietly in the corner, looking devastated. He needed that money. He needed it badly. And now it was gone. Margaret tried to calm everyone down. She said they were investigating. She said they'd figure out what happened. She said they'd find the money. But her voice lacked conviction. She knew the truth even if she couldn't say it out loud. The fund was gone. And it wasn't coming back. I sat there, silent, watching it all unfold. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Guilt, yes. But also satisfaction. A dark, bitter satisfaction that I didn't entirely recognize in myself. They were panicking. They were scared. They were realizing what they'd lost. And it was because of me. Tom looked around the room, his eyes landing on each person one by one. When he got to me, he paused. Just for a second. There was something in his expression, a flicker of suspicion maybe, or just confusion. But he didn't say anything. He couldn't. There was no proof. No trail. No evidence. Just a missing pile of money and a lot of unanswered questions. The meeting ended without resolution. People filed out slowly, talking in hushed tones, trying to make sense of what had happened. I went back to my desk and got back to work. Over the next few days, the investigation ramped up. Margaret brought in IT to check the account logs. They found the transfer, of course, but the destination account was a dead end. It was a new account, opened with false information designed to disappear. They tried to trace it, but I'd been careful. I'd used public Wi-Fi, a burner email, steps that made it nearly impossible to connect it back to me. The department fractured. People started pointing fingers. Some thought it was an external hack. Others suspected someone inside had betrayed them. Trust evaporated overnight. The same people who'd once joked and laughed together now eyed each other with suspicion. Friendships crumbled. The sense of family we'd built, fragile as it was, shattered completely. Daniel never got the money he needed. He took out a predatory loan with a brutal interest rate to pay for his flight. He came back from his trip looking defeated, worn down by stress and grief and financial burden. Every time I saw him, I felt a pang of guilt. He was innocent. He'd voted yes for me. He tried to help. And now he was suffering because of what I'd done. But I couldn't bring myself to regret it. Not fully. Because the people who'd voted no, the people who'd denied me when I needed them most, they were suffering too. Margaret was a wreck. She'd been the one in charge of the fund, and now she looked like a failure. Tom was drowning in questions from upper management, trying to explain how $30,000 had just vanished from an account that wasn't supposed to exist in the first place. They were scared. They were desperate. And they had no one to blame but themselves. Weeks turned into months. The investigation stalled. The money was never recovered. The emergency fund was never rebuilt. The department limped along, a shadow of what it used to be. People started leaving. Daniel found a new job and quit without notice. 2 of the junior accountants transferred to other departments. Even Tom started looking for opportunities elsewhere. I stayed. I kept doing my job, kept showing up every day, kept my head down. Nobody ever accused me directly. There were whispers, sure, sidelong glances and uncomfortable silences when I walked into a room. But there was no proof. And without proof there was nothing they could do. Margaret retired early. She said it was for health reasons, but everyone knew the truth. The fund disappearing had broken something in her. She'd built her reputation on being the caring, compassionate leader who looked out for her team. And in the end that reputation crumbled. She left quietly with a small farewell party that felt more like a funeral than a celebration. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt vindicated. But mostly I just felt tired. Tired and empty and alone. I'd won, I suppose. I'd gotten my revenge. I'd made them pay for what they'd done to me. But the cost was higher than I'd anticipated. I used the money to pay off my debts. I helped my mother with her medical bills. I put some aside for emergencies, real emergencies, the kind I'd always been afraid of. And I gave some away anonymously to people I knew were struggling. I didn't keep it all. I couldn't. It would have felt too much like blood money. My mother recovered fully from her surgery. She never knew what I'd done, what I'd sacrificed and destroyed to be there for her. She just knew that I'd been there, that I'd held her hand, that I'd kept my promise. And that was enough for her. But I knew. I carried the weight of it every single day. I'd crossed a line. I'd become someone I never thought I'd be. And there was no going back. Looking back now, I wonder if I made the right choice. I wonder if there was another way, a better way, a way that didn't involve betraying the people who'd once been my friends. I wonder if I should have just taken the unpaid leave and figured it out, swallowed my pride and my anger and let it go. But then I think about that meeting, about Margaret and Tom telling me that my mother's surgery didn't qualify as an emergency. I think about the email where they called it a bad precedent. I think about the 4 people who voted no, who decided that my pain wasn't worth their compassion. And I think maybe, just maybe, I did the only thing I could do. They taught me a lesson that day. They taught me that loyalty is a one-way street, that kindness has limits, that when push comes to shove, people will always choose themselves. So I chose myself too. I chose my mother. I chose to take back what I'd given, to reclaim the power they'd stripped from me. Was it right? I don't know. Probably not. But it felt necessary. It felt like the only way to regain some sense of control, some sense of dignity in a situation that had left me feeling powerless and small. The department never recovered. It's still there technically, but it's not the same. The people are different. The culture is different. The trust is gone. And I'm still there too, a ghost haunting the ruins of something I helped destroy. Sometimes I see my old coworkers around the office. We exchange polite nods, empty smiles, the kind of acknowledgement you give to strangers. We don't talk about what happened. We don't acknowledge the elephant in the room. We just exist in this awkward, uncomfortable space, pretending everything is fine when we all know it's not. I think about leaving sometimes. Starting fresh somewhere new, somewhere where nobody knows my story, where I can rebuild my sense of self without the weight of what I've done hanging over me. But I don't. I stay. Maybe it's stubbornness. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's a need to face the consequences of my actions, to live with the discomfort I've created. My mother asks me sometimes if I'm happy. She can see it in my eyes, the sadness I try to hide. I tell her I'm fine. I tell her work is just stressful. I tell her not to worry. And she believes me because she wants to believe me because the alternative is too painful. But I'm not fine. I haven't been fine for a long time. I carry this secret like a stone in my chest, heavy and cold. I think about Daniel and his predatory loan. I think about the people who genuinely needed help and found nothing but an empty account. I think about the trust one destroyed, the relationships I poisoned, the good thing I turned into ashes. And yet, when I'm alone at night, when the guilt is at its worst, I also think about my mother. I think about being there for her surgery, about holding her hand, about seeing her smile when she woke up and realized I was there. I think about the fact that if I hadn't done what I did, I might not have been able to afford that. I might have had to choose between her and my bills, between being a good daughter and being a responsible adult. They put me in that position. They forced that choice. And I made it. I don't expect forgiveness. Not from them, not from myself. I did something terrible. I know that. But I also did something necessary. And maybe that's the hardest part to accept, the idea that sometimes those two things can coexist, that you can be both the villain and the victim in your own story. There's a phrase I've been thinking about a lot lately. People say that hurt people hurt people. It's simple, almost childish in its construction, but it's true. I was hurt deeply and profoundly by people I trusted. And in response I hurt them back. I hurt others too, innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire of my pain and anger. It's a cycle, vicious and unending, and I don't know how to break it. If I could go back, I'm not sure I'd do anything differently. That's the most honest thing I can say. I wish I could tell you I'd choose the high road, that I'd forgive and forget and move on. But I don't think I would. The pain was too deep. The betrayal was too real. And when you're drowning, you don't think about who you might pull down with you. You just grab onto whatever you can and hold on tight. What I can tell you is this. The world isn't fair. Companies aren't families. Coworkers aren't friends, not really. They're people doing a job, looking out for themselves, trying to survive just like you. And when the chips are down, when it really matters, most of them will choose themselves. That's not cynicism. That's just reality. But that doesn't mean you have to be like them. That doesn't mean you have to let bitterness and anger turn you into someone you don't recognize. I did that. I let my pain dictate my actions. And now I live with the consequences. If you're reading this, if you're in a situation where you feel betrayed, where you feel like the people who should have your back are letting you down, I want you to know that your feelings are valid. Your anger is justified. Your hurt is real. But I also want you to think carefully about what you do with those feelings. Because revenge might feel good in the moment, but it's a heavy burden to carry for the rest of your life. I made my choice. I cashed out the entire department's emergency fund. I took what I felt I was owed, what I believed they'd denied me unfairly. Maybe I was right. Maybe they deserved it. But I also destroyed something good in the process. I shattered a safety net that had helped people, that had made a difference, that had been built on the idea that we could be better than the corporate machine we worked for. And now it's gone. And I'm the one who killed it. I still work in that office. I still see those people every day. And every single day I'm reminded of what I did, of the person I became when I was pushed too far. I don't know if I'll ever find peace with it. I don't know if I deserve to. My mother is healthy now. She's happy. She doesn't carry the weight I carry. And for that I'm grateful. If my choices, my sins, allowed her to live and thrive and enjoy her life, then maybe it was worth it. Maybe that's the only redemption I'll ever get. But I'll never know for sure. And that uncertainty, that constant questioning, is something I'll live with forever. So that's my story. That's what happened when my company denied my paid leave for my mother's surgery and I cashed out the entire department's emergency fund. I'm not proud of it. I'm not asking for sympathy or understanding. I'm just telling you what happened, how it felt, what it cost. Because sometimes the lines between right and wrong aren't clear. Sometimes good people do bad things for good reasons. Sometimes the world pushes you into a corner and your only choice is to push back, even if it means becoming someone you swore you'd never be. I hope you never have to make the choice I made. I hope your company treats you better than mine treated me. I hope the people around you show you the compassion and support you deserve. But if they don't, if you find yourself in that dark place where anger and hurt are threatening to consume you, just remember that whatever you do, you'll have to live with it. And living with it is harder than you think. My name is Sarah. I've worked in finance for 12 years. I'm a daughter who loves her mother. I'm a person who made a terrible mistake for what felt like a good reason. And I'm still here, still standing, still trying to figure out if redemption is possible for someone like me. I don't have all the answers. I don't even have most of them. But I do know this. We're all just trying to survive in a world that doesn't always make it easy. And sometimes, in the struggle to keep our heads above water, we do things we never thought we'd do. We become people we never thought we'd be. The question isn't whether that's right or wrong. The question is what we do next. How we live with ourselves. How we move forward carrying the weight of our choices. I'm still figuring that out. Maybe I always will be. But at least I can say I was there for my mother when she needed me most. And in the end, maybe that's the only thing that really matters. The months after the fund disappeared were strange. The office felt different, like a house after a fight where everyone is trying to pretend everything is normal but the tension hangs in the air thick enough to choke on. People moved through their days mechanically, going through the motions of work without the casual warmth that used to exist between us. I found myself observing more than participating. I'd sit at my desk and watch the way people interacted now, how they kept conversations strictly professional, how they avoided lingering in common areas, how the laughter that used to punctuate our days had been replaced by uncomfortable silence. It was like watching a slow death, the death of something intangible but precious. There were moments when I almost confessed. Times when the guilt would surge up so strongly that I'd open my mouth, ready to tell someone, anyone, what I'd done. But I never did. Fear held me back, yes, but also a stubborn kind of pride. They'd hurt me first. They'd shown me exactly how much my years of service and loyalty were worth. Why should I be the one to fall on my sword when they'd been the ones to hand me the blade? I started having dreams about it. Not nightmares exactly, just these strange, unsettling dreams where I'd be back in that conference room, watching Margaret's face as she announced the fund was gone. But in the dreams, everyone would slowly turn to look at me, their eyes knowing, accusing, and I'd wake up with my heart racing and sweat on my forehead. My mother noticed the change in me even if she didn't understand the cause. When I'd visit her on weekends, she'd study my face with that particular intensity that mothers have, that ability to see past whatever mask you're wearing straight to the truth underneath. She'd ask if something was wrong at work, if I was having trouble with my boss, if maybe I should start looking for something new. I'd deflect. I'd change the subject. I'd ask about her health, her friends, her garden, anything to move the conversation away from me and my guilt. And she'd let me because she trusted me, because she believed I'd tell her if something was really wrong. That trust was another weight to carry. Work became a kind of purgatory. I was good at my job, good enough that they couldn't fire me without cause, but I was also permanently marked by suspicion. Tom had definitely put two and two together, even if he couldn't prove it. I could see it in the way he looked at me, in the way he'd pause before answering my questions, in the way he started double-checking my work when he'd never done that before. Margaret's replacement was a man named Stevens, brought in from another branch. He was efficient, cold, completely uninterested in building any kind of personal relationship with the team. In a way, it was easier. There was no pretense of family anymore, no illusion that we were anything other than employees doing a job. It was honest, even if it was bleak. The department continued to hemorrhage people. Some left for better opportunities. Others just couldn't stand the atmosphere anymore. Each departure felt like a small victory for the chaos I'd created, and each one added to the growing pile of guilt I carried around. I started therapy. Not because I wanted to confess, but because I needed to talk to someone about the weight I was carrying. I couldn't tell my therapist the whole truth, of course. I framed it as workplace stress, as a moral dilemma about corporate ethics. She talked to me about boundaries, about self-care, about the importance of standing up for yourself. I wonder what she would have said if she'd known the whole story. One afternoon, about 6 months after everything happened, I ran into Daniel at a coffee shop near the office. We hadn't spoken since he'd left the company. He looked better than the last time I'd seen him, less worn down, like he'd shed a heavy burden. We made awkward small talk for a few minutes, dancing around the elephant that neither of us wanted to acknowledge. Then just as we were about to part ways, he said something that stuck with me. He said he was glad he'd left, that losing the money from the emergency fund had actually been a blessing in disguise. It had forced him to look for a better job, one that paid more, one where he didn't feel like he was drowning all the time. He said sometimes the worst things that happen to you end up being the push you need to make necessary changes. I thought about that a lot after we parted ways. Was he right? Had I actually done these people a favor by destroying the safety net they'd become too comfortable relying on? Or was I just trying to rationalize what I'd done, to find some silver lining in the wreckage I'd created? The truth, I think, is somewhere in between. Yes, some people landed on their feet. Daniel got a better job. A couple of the junior accountants moved to departments where they were happier. But others struggled. Others suffered. And that suffering was real, regardless of whatever growth might have eventually come from it. I also started thinking more about the nature of emergency funds themselves, about why we'd felt the need to create one in the first place. The company we worked for was profitable. They could have provided better benefits, better support for employees facing hardship. But they didn't, because it wasn't in their financial interest to do so. So we'd created our own safety net, built it penny by penny out of our own resourcefulness and compassion. And I'd destroyed it. Not because I didn't believe in the concept, but because the people managing it had betrayed the very principles it was built on. They'd turned something beautiful into something conditional, something that only worked if you met certain criteria, if your emergency was the right kind of emergency. That's what made me angriest, I think. Not just that they'd denied me, but that they'd corrupted something pure. They'd taken this act of collective care and turned it into another system of judgment and exclusion. And in doing so, they'd revealed that they were no different from the corporate machine they claimed to be rebelling against. Maybe that's why I don't feel as guilty as I probably should. Maybe that's why, even now, there's a part of me that feels justified in what I did. They broke the social contract first. They violated the trust that the fund was built on. I just finished what they started. But that's also me trying to absolve myself, isn't it? Trying to make myself the hero of a story where I'm clearly not. Because heroes don't steal $30,000. Heroes don't punish the innocent along with the guilty. Heroes don't lie awake at night wondering if they've become the villain. My mother's health continued to improve. She started volunteering at a local community center, teaching art classes to seniors. She seemed happier than she'd been in years, full of purpose and energy. When I'd visit, she'd show me the paintings her students had made, talking about them with such pride and affection. She'd found her community, her purpose, her joy. And I'd sit there smiling and nodding and feeling like a fraud. Because I'd preserved her happiness at the cost of my own, at the cost of other people's security and peace of mind. Was it worth it? I still don't know. 1 year after I'd transferred the money, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was simple. I know what you did. My heart stopped. I sat frozen at my desk, afraid to open it, afraid not to open it. When I finally clicked, the email was short. Just one line. And I don't blame you. I never found out who sent it. I went through every possible person in my mind trying to figure out who might know, who might have pieced it together. But I came up empty. Maybe it was someone who'd suspected all along. Maybe it was someone who'd done their own investigation. Maybe it was just someone who understood, who'd been in a similar position, who knew what it felt like to be pushed past your breaking point. I never responded to the email. What would I even say? Thank you for understanding? Sorry for what I did. I'm not even sure myself whether I'm sorry or not. So I just deleted it and tried to move on, though the words stayed with me. I don't blame you. For words that somehow made everything worse and better at the same time. Work continued. Life continued. I showed up every day, did my job, went home. I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to finally find proof, for everything to come crashing down. If it was going to happen, it would have happened by now. The trail was cold. The investigation had been quietly abandoned. The emergency fund had become a cautionary tale, a story people told about being careful with unofficial accounts and trusting the wrong people. I moved apartments around that time. Nothing dramatic, just a slightly nicer place in a slightly better neighborhood. I could afford it now, with the debts I'd paid off, with the breathing room the money had given me. Every time I walked into my new living room, every time I appreciated the better light or the quieter street, I thought about where that comfort came from. Blood money, I'd think. This is what blood money bought. But I stayed anyway. I didn't punish myself by choosing somewhere worse. I didn't donate it all to charity in some grand gesture of atonement. I kept it. I used it. I let it make my life easier. Because at the end of the day, that's what I'd done it for. Not revenge, not really. Survival. The money had been my lifeline when the company and my coworkers had decided I didn't deserve one. I think that's what people don't understand about situations like this. It's easy to judge from the outside, to say what you would have done differently, to claim you'd have taken the high road. But when you're in it, when you're watching your mother face surgery alone or choosing between rent and being there for the person who gave you life, morality becomes a lot more complicated. I'm not saying what I did was right. I'm just saying I understand why I did it. And maybe that's the best I can hope for. Not forgiveness, not redemption, just understanding. The knowledge that I made a choice in an impossible situation, and I'm living with the consequences. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if they'd said yes. If Margaret and Tom had approved my paid leave, if the emergency fund had worked the way it was supposed to, if I'd been shown the compassion I'd shown others so many times before. I'd still be there probably. Still believing in the illusion of workplace family, still contributing to the fund, still thinking loyalty and hard work mattered. Would that have been better? Maybe. Probably. But it also would have been a lie. And at least now I know the truth. I know exactly what I'm worth to the people I work for, exactly how much my years of service count when it comes down to it. That knowledge is painful, but it's also freeing. I don't have any illusions anymore. I know where I stand. The emergency fund was never rebuilt. Stevens, the new department head, didn't see the point. He said if people had financial emergencies, they should plan better, save more, make different choices. He said it wasn't the department's job to bail people out of their poor decisions. He said a lot of things that made it very clear he'd never struggled a day in his life, never had to choose between two bad options, never known what it felt like to have the system fail you. I didn't argue with him. There was no point. The culture that had allowed the emergency fund to exist in the first place was gone, destroyed by my actions and the fallout that followed. We were just employees now, nothing more, nothing less. And maybe that was more honest anyway. I still see Tom sometimes in the hallways. We don't speak beyond the bare minimum professional courtesy requires. But there's this look he gives me sometimes, this weighing, calculating look, like he's still trying to figure out if his suspicions are correct. I look back at him calmly, neither confirming nor denying, just existing in this strange stalemate we've created. Margaret sends department-wide emails occasionally, updates about her retirement life, photos from her travels, cheerful messages that feel slightly desperate, like she's trying to prove she's happy. I wonder if she thinks about the fund, about what happened, about whether she made the right call. I wonder if she lies awake at night with regrets the way I do. My mother turned 70 last month. We had a small party, just family and a few close friends. She looked radiant, healthy, alive in a way that made my heart ache with gratitude and guilt. She made a speech thanking everyone for being there, for supporting her through her health scare, for being her family. And when she mentioned me, when she talked about how I'd been there for her surgery, how I'd held her hand and made her feel safe, I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to cry. Because yes, I'd been there. But the cost of that presence was higher than she'd ever know. And I'd made other people pay that cost along with me. I don't know what the moral of this story is. I don't know if there is one. Life isn't a fairy tale with clear lessons and happy endings. Sometimes it's just messy and complicated and full of choices that have no good options. Sometimes you do the wrong thing for the right reasons or the right thing for the wrong reasons, and you just have to live with the aftermath. What I do know is this. Companies will always choose their bottom line over their employees. Co-workers will always prioritize their own comfort over your needs. The systems we build to protect each other are only as strong as the weakest person's commitment to them. And when those systems fail, when the people you trusted let you down, you have to decide who you're going to be in response. I decided to be someone who fights back. Someone who takes what she's owed, consequences be damned. Someone who chooses her family over abstract concepts of loyalty and honor. Was it the right decision? I honestly don't know. But it was my decision. And I own it, for better or worse.